The story begins with a man named Viktor Stepanovich Grebennikov, a Russian scientist whose life straddled the boundary between careful observation and extraordinary belief. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He was an entomologist, a specialist in the study of insects, and by all conventional measures, a legitimate scientist. He held credentials, published research, and was respected within his field. His work focused on how insects live, how they fed, moved, interacted with crops, and influenced ecosystems. Over decades, he built a reputation grounded in patience, precision, and deep attention to the natural world. But late in his life, Grebennikov made a claim so strange that it would overshadow everything else he had done. He said he had discovered a force hidden within the microscopic structure of insect wings that could counteract gravity itself. And more than that, he claimed he had used it to build a machine. To understand how he arrived there, you have to picture him not as a fringe inventor, but as a meticulous observer. In the early 1950s and beyond, Grebennikov spent countless hours bent over a desk, carefully sketching insect anatomy with a fine brush. His illustrations were so precise they resembled engineering diagrams. He wasn't just studying insects, he was documenting them with near-obsessive detail. He eventually settled in Novosibirsk, a major scientific center in Siberia, where he worked at the Siberian branch of the All-Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences. Over the years, he collected thousands of specimens, building a natural history museum largely from his own fieldwork. He traveled extensively across Siberia, gathering insects, plants, and geological samples, preserving them, cataloging them, and studying them. This part of his life is not disputed. It is well documented, grounded in real contributions to science. What came next is where the story shifts. Around 1988, while examining the hardened outer shell of a beetle under a microscope, Grebennikov noticed something unusual. The surface of the insect wasn't smooth. It was composed of intricate, repeating microstructures, tiny cavities arranged in precise geometric patterns. This in itself was not shocking. Scientists already knew that insect exoskeletons are highly complex. Their structures are studied even today in fields like biomimicry and material science. But Grebennikov believed these structures were doing something more. He proposed that the arrangement of these microscopic cavities generated a previously unknown physical field. Not magnetic, not electrical, something entirely different. He called it the cavity structural effect. According to him, this effect could be felt physically. He claimed that when he placed his hand near dense clusters of these structures, he experienced a strange pressure, not heat, not static, but a force. He described plants growing differently when exposed to it. Animals, he said, behaved oddly around it. Even his own perception of time, he claimed, seemed to shift. None of these observations were published in peer-reviewed journals. They existed only in his private notes. Still, he believed in them enough to take a radical next step. In 1997, Grebennikov self-published a book titled My World. In it, he described what he had built, using the wing cases of certain beetles, stacked and arranged in precise configurations. He claimed to have created a device capable of counteracting gravity. The structure, he said, amplified the cavity's structural effect to the point where it could lift objects off the ground. The device itself is described as a small, foldable platform, something he could carry and stand on. It had no engine, no fuel, no moving parts. Its operation relied entirely on the geometry of the insect structures. And then he described using it. He wrote about rising silently above the ground, hovering over fields, and accelerating across the Siberian countryside. He described flying at low altitudes, watching forests and roads pass beneath him. He emphasized the silence, no wind, no vibration, no mechanical noise. At one point, he wrote that the only visible sign of his movement was his shadow racing across the ground below. He claimed the platform could reach high speeds, stop instantly, and change direction without inertia. Even more strangely, he suggested that at certain heights, the device rendered him invisible, not by hiding him, but by distorting light or perception around him. He also reported difficulty photographing the device, attributing it to time distortion near the platform, an effect he believed interfered with cameras. The photographs included in his book are, in fact, blurry, Reading his account, one detail stands out: the way he writes. It is not vague or fantastical. It is specific, sensory, grounded in physical experience. He describes the feeling of the air, the quality of light, the view from above. It reads less like speculation and more like memory. That is what makes the story compelling, and also what makes it difficult. Grebennikov died in 2001 at the age of 74. His death was not mysterious. It was a natural end of a long life. But after his death, people began looking for the device he had described. They found nothing. No platform that no detailed schematics, no laboratory records, no physical evidence of large-scale insect collection for such a project, no colleagues who had seen it, no witnesses who had observed him flying. The photographs could not be verified. His flights matched no records, no radar traces, no independent accounts. It was as if the entire invention had vanished with him. Not the man, the proof, from a scientific standpoint. The problem is clear. There are known ways to achieve levitation: aerodynamic lift buoyancy, electromagnetic suspension, acoustic pressure. All of these are well understood, tested, and reproducible. What Grebennikov described does not fit into any of them. For his claim to be true, it would require a fundamental gap in our understanding of gravity, one that somehow exists specifically at the scale of insect microstructures, yet has never been detected by any instrument or experiment. That is not impossible in principle. Science has been revised before, but such revisions require evidence, repeatable, independently verified evidence. Grebennikov provided none, and importantly, he would have known that. He was trained. He understood how scientific validation works. Yet he published his claims anyway. In the years after his death, his story began to spread, first in obscure forums, then more widely across the internet. It had all the elements of compelling mystery. A real scientist with genuine credentials at a dramatic, reality-defying claim, a lack of evidence, a dead author who could not clarify or defend his work, and a Soviet-era backdrop associated with secrecy and hidden research. That last element matters. The Soviet Union did, in fact, conceal scientific programs. Entire fields of research were classified for decades. This historical reality makes stories, suppressed discoveries, feel plausible. But there is a critical distinction. Governments suppress technologies they recognize as valuable. If a working anti-gravity device had been discovered, even by an entomologist, it is highly unlikely it would have been ignored. It would have been studied, classified, and developed. There is no record of any such response. So what are we left with? One possibility is that Grebennikov genuinely believed what he wrote. Human perception is not infallible. Under certain conditions, it can produce experiences that feel completely real but leave no external trace. Another possibility is that he was engaging in a kind of imaginative extrapolation, taking real observations and extending them into speculative territory, blurring the line between science and personal vision. This is not unheard of, especially among naturalists who spend decades closely observing the world. The boundary between observation and interpretation can become fluid. What we do know is this: no one has ever reproduced the cavity structural effect. Not once, despite decades of research into insect structures. And yet, dismissing the story entirely feels unsatisfying, because Grebennikov was not a fraud in the conventional sense. He did not promote his work widely. He did not seek fame. His book had a small audience. There is no clear sign he intended to deceive, which leaves a more uncomfortable conclusion. He may have been a careful observer who, at some point, followed an idea further than the evidence could support. There is a broader pattern here. History contains many figures with real achievements whose names later become attached to extraordinary, unsupported claims. The credibility of their legitimate work becomes a foundation for ideas that extend beyond it. Grebennikov fits that pattern, but that doesn't mean his story should be ignored. It means it should be approached honestly, not accepted without evidence, not dismissed without thought, but examined with a clear question: where's the proof? And the answer remains the same. There isn't any. What remains, then, is not a solved mystery, but an open one. A man who spent his life studying insects claimed he discovered something extraordinary within them. He described it in vivid detail. He put his name on it, And then he died. The device he described was never found. The evidence never surfaced. The explanation never arrived. What disappeared was not the man. What disappeared was the answer. And decades later, it still hasn't returned.